Hello, everybody. This is Jess from 3D Learning Experts, and you're listening to the LD Experts Podcast, the show for busy parents who want to help their kids with learning disabilities, or as I like to say, learning differences, go from surviving to thriving. Hello, everybody. Today we have the pleasure of interviewing one of my former students' moms, Professor Roxanne Varzi, and she's going to talk to us about her newest book that she's written. Welcome, Roxanne.
Great to be here, Jess. Thanks for having me. So good to see you again.
Yes, it's great seeing you too. Okay, so tell us about your book that you wrote.
All right. Well, so I'm an anthropologist. I guess I should start there. Okay. And I love to write. And I'm also a visual anthropologist. That's one of the things I do. And
what is a visual anthropologist?
So visual anthropologist studies either visuality in terms of like visual culture, paintings, films, things like that, or makes documentaries, just put very simply. So we could either learn how to decode the world visually and teach people how to do that, or how we interpret the world visually, or we can actually make visuals. And I do both. So I teach students. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say that sounds perfect for a dyslexic person.
It is. It's funny. Like I just kind of like sort of fell into it, trained myself. It wasn't a program I was in necessarily, but yeah, I think I've always been just very visual. And so it was something I gravitated toward naturally. We didn't necessarily have visual anthropology. I did my PhD at Columbia University in New York City. And part of the reason I went there is because I knew I was interested in film. And Columbia has a really good film school. So I just was lucky and got to sit in on a lot of documentary classes and film classes. And I got to meet a lot of the faculty there. And so I sort of got this like side training, which was great. And I love to write. That's the other thing. I really love fiction and stories. And I have been raising a young, well, he's now a teen, dyslexic learner. And I know that storytelling, at least for him, has been one of the best ways to learn, whether it's math, like The Life of Fred, or whether it's just anything in general, history. He just loves to learn through stories. And so before the pandemic, just for fun, because I love murder mysteries, I just had this idea for this murder mystery that revolved around a nature photographer and in Montana. And I didn't really have time to write it because I have a full-time job teaching anthropology at University of California, Irvine. So it wasn't until the pandemic where I had all this extra free time where I started writing it again. And at the same time, I was noticing, my son at that point was 12, and he had been sitting in on some classes at UCI in anthropology. He actually prefers paleontology and stuff I'm not really as trained in. And I noticed just how much, again, even in the social sciences or in the sciences, how much storytelling, how important it is. And I noticed my own students were kind of losing the thread. They were having a hard time during the pandemic. And right before the pandemic, I had written a play, and it incorporated a lot of my work on Iran, which is what I used to work on mainly as an anthropologist. And I noticed that my students understood the material so much better when we were doing theater. And so I decided to put in a lot of my visual anthropology course into the murder mystery. And I really wanted to gear it toward anyone from high school all the way up through graduate students and the general public. Like I'll be on an airplane and someone will say, "What do you do?" And I'll say, "I'm an anthropologist." And they'll be like, "That was my favorite course in college, but it wasn't my major." So I was thinking we're not exposed to it, until we get to college. And by then, sometimes it's too late to major. So I thought, why not expose people ahead of time in a fun way? And so that's what I did. And the character, the protagonist is dyslexic. She has dyslexia. And that was really important to me as well at first because of my son. But then as I got diagnosed, I started noticing like these quirks I had as a student all the way up through my PhD. And, this direction I went with visuality. And so the character, and, Jess, not everyone with dyslexia, it doesn't exhibit the same in everyone, right? So there are three of us in this household, and we're all very different in how our dyslexia affects us and even the strengths of it and all of that. And so I started really kind of, having to think about, is this character more like the kind of dyslexia I have or that he has? But it really is quite subjective. It's what I've been exposed to and what I've read in different books. And it started becoming more personal. I guess I'll just put it that way. I started relating to the character a little bit more than I had. I related to her more in a motherly way before, and then I started relating to her more on a personal level.
And so you were telling me before we started this interview that you were recently diagnosed with dyslexia. When was that? How did that come to be?
That was pretty amazing. So I signed up, I think it was through the Dyslexia Parent Network or one of the many support groups I'm on. They were asking for children that had already been diagnosed to do the pilot study for Brock Aid's app. He and Fernette Aid, who wrote the Dyslexic Advantage, wonderful, wonderful researchers and people, wanted to test an app that would be an easy way to identify people with dyslexia, but especially to identify strengths, because people with dyslexia have amazing abilities that we don't always notice or nurture. So Rumi signed up for that. I can't remember how old he was, maybe 7 or 8. And they wanted people, especially who had already been tested, so they could really test to see if the app was accurate. And it was pretty amazing, actually, with him. It was pretty, like, they guessed pretty much every little aspect. And so I emailed Brock and I said, it's supposed to be genetic, and I'm sure it's my husband because he's a sculptor and he's very visual and he's, got all these dyslexic skills. But can we both take the test? Because we're curious. And we did. And, if like 98 is the most severe, that's what Rumi got. And his dad and I got like 50, both like 48 each, and we were told that that's pretty typical of adults with dyslexia who have either been remediated or figured out how to muddle through somehow. So I wasn't really surprised. Just because I started really, my mom, we were trying to educate the family, and my mom was listening to a podcast about dyslexia, and she was like, Roxanne, you're a terrible speller. Like, you're just awful at spelling. And she was like, are you sure you're not dyslexic? But, I was an early reader. So then I started looking at the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity, Sally Shayowitz, and I was doing a lot of research on dyslexia. And I found out about stealth dyslexia, and I thought, well, that actually sounds exactly like me. Because it's not necessarily about decoding always, but yeah, I'm terrible at spelling. Whodunit can be spelled apparently with a double N or a single N. And I have had more problems because I guess the Library of Congress catalog has it with one N, but somehow Amazon did it with two N's. And now it's like this huge problem because somewhere I probably misspelled it, when I was filling in something along the way. And this was after telling Rumi, oh, there's spell check. It's not going to affect you later in life. And it totally affects you later in life. Even just like today, a colleague corrected my spelling, which is really obnoxious. It's very infantilizing as an adult, as an equal, to have another adult correct your spelling. And it just happens all the time to people with dyslexia. And it's just one more way that we kind of struggle with the esteem of kind of being on an equal level with everybody else who spells or can decode. I hadn't really thought about these things before. I think they were very unconscious, but now I'm like more aware of them.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Yeah. And, with you being a professor, maybe it will help you be more sympathetic of your students who don't realize that they have it.
No, absolutely. And I bring it up all the time in class, because I have dysgraphia. There's no question. I'll be on the whiteboard and I'll just say, I have dysgraphia. You'll have to excuse my spelling and my handwriting. If you can't read it, come and talk to me later. And by the way, I'm a disability ally. If any of you want to talk about dyslexia and it's really changed the way I feel about assistive technology and also how I output things. Again, like putting anthropology in a novel, which a lot of people would probably, I don't know, we'll see how they receive it, would be like, oh, that doesn't count as like curriculum. And originally, I won't say who, but I was going to publish it with a curriculum press. I didn't go there, but I think it's time that we start rethinking, how we're putting things out to people who are trying to learn. I was very strict 20 years ago. I was this young professor and I came in, I was like, no electronics in the classroom. The hand-brain connection, use your pens. And now I'm like horrified that, I was like that and thinking, oh, the poor person who had to go to disability services to be able to use their computer in class, but thank God that was short-lived. But yeah, absolutely.
So when did your book come out?
It came out in October for National Dyslexia Awareness Month. It was really important to me. Yeah, to have it debut. And I went to Hunter High School in New York City and I did a talk there, which was great. And it was really fun too, because I could really tell which students in the audience had dyslexia or ADHD based on the questions they were asking.
Oh, wow.
And it was a lot of fun. And I really, really want to reach out to high school students, because I want to reach them before they get to college. I want them to see that it's possible to get to college. I want them to be exposed to some of this. I know some of it might be over their heads, but that's okay. You just skip that part. It's a murder mystery. The stakes are low, and it was just fun. These students are incredible. It's a gifted magnet. And they were just, one student said, so with ADHD, and if you want to be a writer, but your thoughts are all over the place and you don't remember anything, like, what do you do? And I was like, you use a notes app on a telephone, or you just find another, like, you just don't worry about trying to get it all down immediately, but you just take what you can. And then later, when you can hyper focus, then you put it all together. And no, it was great. And one of the teachers raised his hand and said, I have dyslexia. And it felt really empowering, and like, oh, this is why I wrote this. Nobody had read it yet because it literally had come out like 2 days before. But yeah, it was great. That's kind of what I want out of it.
And I don't know if you know this, but do you know if New York has started implementing the dyslexia pilot program yet?
I'm not sure. It's kind of funny because afterwards I had lunch with the person who I guess is the maybe SPED liaison, and the I can't remember what they call the resource specialist, and like the librarian who hosted me. And I had said, like, one of the students said, what if I don't know if I have dyslexia or ADHD, but I kind of feel like I do because of some of the things that you're saying. And then I said, oh, you have the right to be tested, and you have the right to to FAPE and all this stuff. And I think the resource teacher was kind of like, well, it might be a little different in California. I was like, oh, I thought some of this was federal. So I don't know, but it did sound like some of the stuff I was saying that was California wasn't quite New York, but then also it felt like New York was doing some stuff that we're definitely not doing.
Yeah, because New York's mayor is dyslexic. And so they're supposed to be having a whole pilot program for the entire school district, I think.
I read that. I
read it about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, it didn't come up. So it's interesting. It hasn't hit the ground in that way. And, as long as, I think, like, how long has Newsom been our governor? I mean, I think I've been emailing him since, like, probably since Ruby was coming to you, for tutoring about California. I think, finally something's happening there. But, it's interesting that, we have a governor with dyslexia. They have a mayor with dyslexia. And, these are people that we're hoping to be able to change some of these laws, so we'll see. These are two really big, important places for public education.
Well, and a mom in Texas, she just kept petitioning to have dysgraphia become an official day. And she was able to do that, not this past October, but the year before that. So, it's us moms who get things done.
It's so true. And it's funny too, like, so many, I'm thinking about like Max Brooks, and there's so many, famous dyslexic writers with dyslexia, or, people in Hollywood, and they're always talking about how their moms are the ones who championed them and, did everything to get them through. And it's true. I don't know why it has to be that way, but.
Right. Well, and I mean, I wouldn't be sitting here right now if it weren't for helping my youngest child. So that's how my journey in the dyslexic world started. But
yep.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that your child doesn't really like you to talk about things anymore. So I don't know if you can answer some questions and we don't need your child's name. But your child is twice exceptional. And
yes. Yeah.
And so I have often said that the students who are 2E tend to be the hardest ones to remediate and help in tutoring. So I just was wondering if you would be open to sharing a little bit about your journey with a 2E child.
Absolutely. I'm curious, what have you found that makes it harder?
I think, and your child being one of the two hardest 2E children that I worked with.
Now you know what my life has been like for 14 years.
In my opinion, it's because they are so smart they are frustrated with themselves
Yes.
for not
Yes.
not being able
Exactly.
to do what they expect of themselves.
Exactly. That is the hardest thing. And I was going to bring up, it's interesting as an adult with dyslexia and just all of the background stuff I was doing before the book came out, reaching out to various people in the dyslexia world. As an adult right now, especially in places like the UK, everything is about the strengths, the strengths of dyslexia and, Richard Branson and this and the entrepreneurship. And it's like, that's easy to talk about once you've gotten past all of this. So for my son, he's like, I am like, because I mentioned it in the novel, he's heard the novel like 4 times, which is kind of funny. I know he likes it because he wouldn't listen to it 4 times otherwise, but he's like very critical and has a lot of like input, but he's like, stop talking about the strengths, he's like, and I think there is this like, this like, you need to understand how frustrating it is for me. And it's true. I think it is because, and I think it becomes more difficult in the teen years. It really does somehow, because the discrepancy is even worse, because if they're behind, it's way more glaring than when you're behind in kindergarten or first grade or second grade, and suddenly, I mean, again, like he's taking college level courses, he has an entire semester of college under his belt, and he started when he was 11 online at ASU. And these are like, bio, paleontology is his big thing. And that's also something that I'm going to talk about with this, because it's pretty amazing. Like, I believe in serendipity, but he can't access it himself. He needs his father's help to do the reading of some of the stuff that's online. He doesn't like the computer voice. He needs him to scribe still. He has a hard time concentrating his thoughts in different, but then he's brilliant. And so it's very frustrating. It is very frustrating. So for us, I think the solution for parents or a couple of things that have really helped. One is I early on separated out education from the social. I don't think, I think as homeschoolers, we hear a lot about like, oh, but what about their socialization? I don't think being socialized in a public school where the teacher is bullying you and you feel awful because everyone's doing things that you can't do. I don't think that's a space to socialize necessarily. And I don't think that's a space where you're going to be like hanging out and meeting friends and, like building self-esteem. So we separated that out early on. And then the other thing is to just really make sure that he's getting fed intellectually and that he has access to that. That's the hardest thing. A place like ASU has been amazing. They were really helpful. They took his, IEP and, gave him extra time. It was really funny because I was having a really hard time getting through initially and getting the extra time on the test. And he had this paleontology class with the professor who discovered Lucy. And this is his thing. He loves paleontology. And the test was coming up and they do a scan of the room, online to make sure that there aren't any books and you're not cheating. And then they watch the video because his dad's in there reading the questions to him and he's answering, and they watch to make sure that he hasn't been fed any questions. It's pretty serious. And then, though I think they got sued for privacy, and I don't know if they do that anymore, but which is kind of funny. But I worked so hard and over the weekend before the final exam to make sure he had like double time, which I think was supposed to be, I don't know, 2 hours or 4 hours. This is my dyscalculia. It was one of the two. And I was upstairs teaching on Zoom and they were downstairs, and I hear this and it was supposed to start at the same time as my class. And 20 minutes in, I hear him screaming and I was like, oh, and he's a very, boisterous person, as you know. And I was like, oh no, what happened? Like, did they get cut off? Like, did they lose the connection? Like, what happened? I worked so hard. And he comes running up and he's like, I got everything right. And I'm like, are you done? I was like, I'm done. And I was like, 20 minutes? Like, you had 2 hours, 4 hours. And he was like, I'm done. And I was like, did you think through all of it? He's like, I know I got him right. And I was like, are you sure you didn't just like impulsively answer the questions? Like, did you stop and think? He's like, I'm good. And sure enough, he got like an A+ in the class. I was like, I don't know. I guess that's for us, that's been the thing, is to just separate out. Am I nervous that he's not going to be able to write and do his college papers on his own later in life? Yeah, I am. But I keep having to remind myself he's 14. So maybe I still have time to work on that. But I don't, it's hard. The 2E thing is extremely hard because they're very hard on themselves and they're so hyper aware. By the time they get to the teenage years, they're very aware of what they're not doing that everyone else is doing.
Well, and I think I tutored him when he was like 5 or 6. I mean, he was aware at that age.
Even then, yeah. Oh, he was. It's funny because, he would eat books when he was little, and somebody told me, like when he was like 1, and someone said, "Oh, that shows a real appreciation for the written word." And that's his strength area, it's his verbal skills. And I was like, okay, But yeah, I think early on it's interesting because he would kind of slam books down. And I was like, what is up with this behavior with books? Like, he wouldn't slam anything else down. He would take his pictures, like, slam them down. And I'm like, is it because they're just easy to slam? And then I realized later he actually was trying to read. When he was really, really young, he was trying to read. And I would read Dr. Seuss to him, and he would memorize it, and he would be able to, tell me the ending as I was getting there, which is actually, ironically, why I thought he wasn't dyslexic. And I have a little passage. My main character says, my mom didn't think I had dyslexia because I could rhyme. And that was like one of those myths I had in my head somewhere. Somebody somewhere told me, oh, if you can rhyme, you don't have dyslexia. But they're poets, famous poets who have dyslexia. So I don't know where I got that idea, but clearly he could rhyme.
And because rhyming is one of the common traits of people with the inability to rhyme is one of the common traits of people with dyslexia. So, in your mind, you're like, okay, well, if he can do it, then that means he's not dyslexic. Just like the moms who, if their kids don't reverse their letters or numbers, they think they're not dyslexic.
And I reversed. I was born in Iran, and I went back there for the first time. We had left during the revolution when I was 8 or 9, and I went back there for the first time when I was 21. And I had all my journals, because I like him. I wanted to be a writer from the time I was 8, and he's like that. He's always wanted to be a writer. We're both very verbal. And I looked at my journals, and I was completely a mirror writer. And I noticed that before I ever had him, before I ever thought about dyslexia. And so when he started getting diagnosed, and he was the B's and D's and C's, and that he'd really had a hard time with that. And then he also had some vision therapy stuff. It was really difficult for him. That was a huge challenge, but I had it. And then I heard, well, every child had mirror rights until a certain age. And I was like, do they? Because I don't know. I was like, this was like 8 and 9. I was doing this, and I was already reading C.S. Lewis to myself. I had already was reading very advanced stuff, but I was a mirror writer. And it's funny too, because I wasn't, people weren't reading to me, or I wasn't reading the stuff for class. I didn't ever learn how to pronounce all of the words. Like, I remember learning the word coup because we were living through a revolution, and I would call it coupe because I hadn't heard it before, but I'd seen it. So it's interesting. I mean, I just have a very intense relationship with language. And I think a lot of people with dyslexia do, either because they struggle with it or because they're verbally gifted with it, like Agatha Christie. I had no idea when I started, writing murder mysteries, or maybe I knew at that point that she had dyslexia, and she also was an early reader. So you get a lot of when you look it up on the web, you get a lot of people who are like, no, she wasn't dyslexic. I don't know why people want to give that to her. She was an early reader. And it's like, you can be an early reader and have dyslexia. Like, it's a complex neurological, process. It's not just about reading, just like giftedness is not just about being an early reader. And that also drives me crazy as a parent. So when I'm in the gifted, community of parents, it's like, oh, my kid's reading at 3. I'm like, doesn't mean anything. Yeah, they're smart, whatever, but it doesn't mean that, the kids who aren't reading at 3 aren't gifted. They might be dyslexic.
Well, is there anything else about your book that you'd like to share with us?
The audiobook's out.
Okay.
I think, that's the other thing. It's funny, how, the things you do, like you said, you became a tutor and an advocate, and now you're a podcaster and a YouTuber around all of these amazing things you call the 3D because of your children. And it's when I look back, I was sitting and recording the audiobook in the studio, and I suddenly remembered when he was really young, I was going to a conference somewhere. I was traveling without him for 3 or 4 days. And I'd been reading, A Walk It in My Pocket and Dinner at Panda Palace and all of his fun books to him every night. And I think I was going to be on a time difference, and I wasn't going to be able to read to him. So I recorded them for him before I left so he could hear me read. And I thought, here I am. He's 14 and I'm still recording books for him to read. But there's something really special about reading out loud to people. So I really enjoyed that process. It's very different from creating a textbook, a textual or text-based book. So I'm excited about that. And that's something I would have never really thought about, I think, if it weren't for him. Mm-hmm. And knowing how important it's been to him to have audiobooks. Yeah.
And where is your book available?
Everywhere. Anywhere books are sold, as they say. So Amazon, it's on Kindle. The nice thing too, when it comes out on Audible, it'll be on hopefully WhisperSync, so you can get the Kindle and listen along. So it's at the independent bookstores. If you prefer to buy it there, you can order it there. And please order it for your local library. They should be able to get it and stock it if people request it.
Oh, wow. Good to know.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for sharing about your experience, strength, and hope for our people. And to share such a special opportunity for people to learn about dyslexia while reading a murder mystery. That's exciting.
I hope so. It's going to be a series, so she's going to learn more and more as time goes on, and I'm learning more and more as time goes on, and we're all learning more and more. So hopefully it'll develop. And I am giving your readers or listeners or watchers a free copy of either the audiobook or the Kindle, if I can figure that out.
Okay, well, that's awesome. Thank you. And I remember what I wanted to ask you now. Is your child in the SALT program at ASU?
No. What's the SALT program?
Oh, well, I have a whole podcast on that. It's for neurodiverse students. So to go to the college and get assistance and such.
I think I did hear about that, but I think it's in person, right?
Oh, can they only do it in person? I don't know.
Once they actually enroll in college and they're in person, but I'm going to look at it again. I do remember hearing about it, but he's not there right now. No. But I will look at it again.
My youngest son is not as academically inclined, so
I don't know if this one's academically inclined, but this is the big story. Yeah. So you asked if I wanted people to know anything else. So this is crazy, but I started writing this. We were in Montana in Bozeman, and my young paleontologist dragged me to the dinosaur hall and the dinosaur, everything. So we were at the Museum of the Rockies, and there was an exhibit, and I noticed that the guy's name who had discovered this dino or whatever was named Jack Horner. So I was like, oh, that's great. I'll put him in as a character in my book, not knowing anything about him, just that he was a paleontologist at the museum where I was going to set my novel. So I put him in there, and then I let it go because I didn't have time to write it. And then my son joined a program, wonderful national program called Eye to Eye, which pairs children with neurodiversity, not children, they were supposed to be middle schoolers, but I guess I missed that memo. I think he was 11 or 12 at the time, but they let him in. It was very nice. Middle school or high schoolers with college students at Chapman University. So he would go there after school one day a week, and he would get to hang out with these neurodiverse college students who were mentors, and they would play games or whatever, they would have activities. So one day he comes running in, and he was like, oh my God, where are my fossils? And I was like, what do you want with your fossils? I don't know where your fossils are. And he said, our mentor at Chapman, he's a paleontologist, and he's dyslexic. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. I'm like, what's his name? And he's like, Jack Horner. And I was like, what? I just couldn't believe it. And I really deeply believe that sometimes the universe just tells us we're on the right path. And I was like, I was meant to write this book. And then slowly, I was like, and my main character has dyslexia. And how odd is that this paleontologist, who's this like side character in my book, is this famous, world-renowned, paleontologist with dyslexia, and he's mentoring my son, and he's a Chapman. So the next week I went and I was like, hi, you don't know me, crazy woman here. Hello, I'm writing a book, you're in it. Of course, he had already been in like Spielberg's Jurassic Park, and he was like uber famous and well-known, and just the nicest man. And I said, can I use you as a character? And he was like, yeah, if this is going to be something that's going to help the dyslexia community, absolutely. And I went over and I read him the parts that he's in out loud. We sat in a cafe, and just wonderful mentor for people, especially like my son, who want to do that kind of thing, and I mean, he's brilliant, and he's still like, got through everything without reading, and, just had a very different path. And I think if I leave parents with anything, it's just my favorite Jonathan Mooney thing, which is just like, let go of like normal, these kids are going to just have a very, very different path, and it's going to be their own path. And do I look back every single, like we were like, okay, day at a time, week at a time, year at a time, 6 months at a time. We're constantly changing the way we were schooling, what remediation he may or may not need or could even handle at the time. Like I remember, and I've been really lucky to have a lot of specialists who gave me a lot of their time, like Frank Cronella, who started the ADHD school at UCI, and it was he's passed away since, was a neurologist, and he was wonderful and read all of my son's evaluations and gave me some feedback. And he would say, don't overload him either. The brain can only take so much. So there was a lot of good advice, but does that mean that I didn't look back and say, oh my God, did we do enough? Or maybe we shouldn't have done that, or maybe we should have done this, or maybe we shouldn't have pulled him out of that. He was enjoying it, even if we were having a hard time with it. Or maybe there's constant noise in your head about what you should or shouldn't be doing. And across the board, there were people who were like divided right down the line, experts, and like, do you medicate? Don't you medicate? Do you do the spelling first? Do you not do the spelling at all? So it's just like, it's constant. And I think it really is an individualized program, and your child better than anybody. But you do have to lean on a lot of expert opinions, and we have a lot of good ones, and people like you who really, helped us in the very beginning. I think we were lucky in that sense, that we started early with remediation, and found you immediately, which was great. But it doesn't mean it was easy. It's hard. But I think, and the other thing I will say is, for us, and I don't know if we've always done a good job with it, we decided, and I remember telling a doctor, a pediatrician that we saw only once, because after that I was like, oh, forget it. She was like, what do you mean he's not in school? And I said, he was being bullied by a kindergarten teacher. And I said, his self-esteem is more important than academics. And for us, and I've gone to the end of the line in academia. I'm a full professor at a research institute. And I will say that is less important than self-esteem and emotional IQ and emotional well-being. So for us, it was always like protect his self-esteem, protect his emotional life, protect that. That's more important. Academics will come later, especially with the 2E, with the gifted kids. They're always going to, be gifted. they will find a way, to figure things out. But if they are depressed, if they are feeling bad about themselves, if they are, not doing well emotionally, then academics doesn't really matter. And we're seeing that crisis all around us, outside of the neurodiverse community, outside of the gifted community, everywhere. Everyone is suffering from this. And I think a lot of it, in my opinion, is because we push children too hard in academics at the expense of play, at the expense of, going in their own direction. And it's a balancing act, and it's really hard. Do I sometimes say maybe he shouldn't have spent 3 years playing Dungeons and Dragons and should have done more math? Maybe. But, can't regret it. You have to just keep moving forward and reevaluate it.
Can you elaborate on his experience being bullied by a kindergarten teacher?
Oh my God. That's, in some ways, we were like, okay, that actually, had that not happened, we would have not found out that he was dyslexic, because he was so good. He was so verbal. And, one small example that I remember is that he had this penny jar. This is in kindergarten, and they were taking a penny jar to class for a DARE thing or something, which I don't even know why kindergartners were contributing to Mothers Against Drunk Driving or something like that. I don't even remember. He brought the penny jar, and he's an exaggerator. He's a storyteller, and he doesn't know how many pennies. He's like, I have $1 billion in there. And she's like, stop lying. And he was really upset. And he came home and he's like, I got in a lot of trouble for lying about my pennies. And I went and I spoke to her and I said, this was a teachable moment. You could have taken the pennies out and counted them and shown him that it wasn't $1 million. You don't have to call him a liar. And then another day, morning, they had these morning mats and oh, what happened over the weekend? And he told this crazy story about a raccoon in the trash, and it had come after his father. And he really elaborated on something very small, which is we saw a raccoon near the trash can. Again, she called him a liar. It was just seriously? And it was just the constant, he was doing this wrong, he was doing that wrong. And, he's getting a little bit now too. And it was so intense. And when we went in for the IEP, for the very first meeting, I said, she said something about he talks a lot. I talk a lot, and we talk a lot. We're very verbal. And that was one of the first things she said. And I said, well, he's very verbal, and he likes to use language. And he's, and then I said also, oh yeah, he wanted to look at books in the library that weren't for the kindergarten kids. He wanted to look at some other books, and he couldn't read them. She's like, he can't read them. Why should he? And they're not allowed to be outside of their area. And I said, well, he's gifted. And she rolled her eyes and practically fell out of her chair. And she was like, whatever.
Oh wow.
And I just thought, oh my God, I need to get him out of here. And I had heard things about this teacher before, but she had a special place in her vengeful heart for him. But again, like we saw it a little bit as a gift because it really forced our hand in terms of getting him, because she just kept coming to us and she would yell at him about the handwriting. I mean, he was in kindergarten. She got mad at him because he didn't finish, things that they were doing in class. And I said, okay, well then maybe there's a problem if there's this expectation. He's my first and only child. I didn't know kids in kindergarten needed to do this level of work. But if he's not doing it and everyone else is, then maybe he should be tested. And we knew he was gifted early on. It was really obvious because he had a very large vocabulary at a very, very young age. And he knew all the dinosaurs by the time he was like 2.
Wow.
We saw a kid. That was crazy. I remember seeing a young child, and it was funny because the parents got like really sort of shamed because I guess the little girl had wanted to go to the bathroom. She was on one of these news shows and she had just been put in Mensa and she knew all the dinosaurs. And she kept saying, can I go to the bathroom now? They're like, no, tell us all of your dinosaurs. And it was kind of that thing, like the gifted kid on show. And I remember looking at it and being like, he knows all of his dinosaurs. Maybe he should be in Mensa, but who cares? Like, who cares? But I realized like he wasn't, if that was the expectation and he was so far ahead, then what was happening there? And they didn't want to test him at first. They were like, no, and then they did test him. They're like, nothing's wrong. No, we don't see anything here that's wrong. And again, I was really lucky to be in this environment at a research university where Mark Lerner, who, a wonderful doctor who would happen to be his first pediatrician, also lives in our neighborhood. And, his wife was the head of the Prentice School. And, he knows a lot. He's written on ADHD and dyslexia and was able to take all of the IUS, well, I shouldn't call it the school where my son was in kindergarten and tested. I took all the stuff to him and he read it and he was like, how could they not see that he has a language learning disability? I was like, what's that? He was like, dyslexia. It's clear as day. And I was like, wow, really? So then I took him, we went and got him tested with David Palmer because he specializes in gifted testing. And I just wanted, more. And so we got a fuller picture. But he was like, it's clear to me that he's going to suffer in this school system. You can't put him there. He's too smart to be, held behind in the way they'll hold him behind. And he's too behind to be like, not like the GATE program and that stuff didn't even start until 3rd grade, but he was just never going to be able to be in both places at the same time. He couldn't be in SPED and in the advanced stuff. And the advanced stuff was really a lot of busy work anyway, we found out later on. So it just didn't make any sense to us.
Yeah, I mean, the gifted program, when my oldest child was in it, they played with Legos for an hour and a half a day, 3 times a week.
At home.
But I mean, that was pretty much what it was. They just created, they built stuff that was them using the creativity of their mind and being pulled out of regular classes. So, yeah.
That's great. I mean, in this school system, it doesn't start until 3rd grade. So
yeah,
we didn't even get that far.
It didn't start until, I don't think it starts until 3rd grade anywhere.
Okay.
But I mean, my oldest child's 30 too. So this was a while back.
But Legos, that was another, in terms of the strengths of dyslexia, that was an interesting thing too, because that was another area that it was so obvious that he was so ahead because he couldn't read any of the catalogs, but he could look at the pictures of very advanced Lego sets and put them together by himself when he was very, very young. I do not have those dyslexic gifts at all. Like that, my husband has those dyslexic gifts. He's a sculptor, he's an engineer, he's a system person, he's an acupuncturist, he knows systems, but I do not have that. I'm the verbal one. But yeah, he could just sit there and it was just incredible. I mean, it was amazing. And I wasn't sure if he wasn't reading and he didn't know numbers, but he could figure out this was sequentially and he would work it out. And then one day the Legos disappeared and the games appeared.
Oldest child who was in the gifted program is a DM for D&D, two D&D games, and he would much rather spend all of his free time playing D&D.
Well, and it's, if anyone out there works for Wizards of the Coast, my son wants to write. That's his goal in life, is to write for Wizards of the Coast. That is his thing. And it's funny because I'm already into writing the 2nd book and there's a D&D element. And he was like, you better check with Wizards of the Coast. It could be copyrighted, Mom. I said, I'm sure I can have a character that plays D&D. I mean, I'm an anthropologist. That's just ethnographic. That's what's happening in the world. He's like, nope, you need to check with Wizards of the Coast and make sure that you're not plagiarizing. I was like, it's a character play. He's like, nope, check with Wizards of the Coast. I think he's on top of all of their legal arguments. He's so into it. I don't know where he gets his information, but Yeah, that's his goal, to like own a game store and write campaigns for Wizards of the Coast.
Well, that sounds like great, goals. And I mean, I don't know how he's going to work in the paleontology into owning a video game store, but
who knows?
Maybe he'll just do that on his spare time.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how far he gets with that. Again, it's like, I don't know, Jack Horner is incredible that he was able to do that without all the prereqs. And I think it really, we'll see. But I think it'll always be, special interest for sure.
Well, and we talked to my oldest child about potentially opening up a gaming store when he was kind of trying to figure out what he was going to do. But
that's great.
But yeah, that was something that was of interest to him. But he didn't like the long hours he would have to have owning a business.
Does he tutor math by any chance?
No, but I have an amazing math tutor.
So knows D&D? See, it's that D&D connection.
Really... Yeah, I don't know. And I wish he did tutor math, because he was a math tutor when he was in high school. And I was like, you're so good at it. But he said because it comes so easy for him, it's hard for him to explain it.
I think that's the thing. And that goes back to like Jack Horner or anyone who's done a very divergent path. Like I'll have students come to me and say, I want to do anthropology the way you do it. I want to make films. I want to do sound projects. I want to write poetry for ethnography. And I'm like, that's my path. And it's very divergent. And it takes a certain set of, life experiences, to be able to do that. And then to explain it exactly. If it comes really easy, you can't really, it's funny because lately people like Richard Branson are doing these courses on how to think like a dyslexic. And I'm like, can you teach that? I mean, maybe you can teach some of the skills of dyslexic thinking, but at the end of the day, if it's like something that's like so ingrained naturally in you and it's not something you learned, it would be kind of hard. So if you're really super gifted in math, it's the same thing where teachers are like, show me the work, show me how you got to that answer. And you're like, I can't, I just know it.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting because I mean, for me, I had to learn that everyone doesn't think like me when I started hiring staff, because the first 8 months I was so frustrated because I'm like, why aren't they doing what I expect them to do? And it's because they're not dyslexic and they don't think outside of the box. So now I over explain and I'm like, sometimes my son's like, yeah, I'm not an idiot. I'm like, I know, but I never want to assume that people are thinking what I am thinking.
Yeah, no, I remember in grad seminars, I would say something and there would be like dead silence. And I would be like, right? And everyone would be like, no, like, what did you just like, what are you trying to say? I'm like, okay. I skipped over a few steps. And I do that in conversation too. I'll probably skip a bunch of stuff that I've forgotten that I was saying in my head, but it just happened too quickly and it didn't come out.
Yeah, my youngest son does that all the time. And his siblings are used to him and they can fill in those missing pieces. I struggle to do that. I'm like, huh? And so when he was younger, the siblings would tell me what he meant to say. Like, oh, okay.
I do that with texting. I'm terrible because I love my assistive technology and I dictate. And then sometimes I'm just very quick and I send it and I don't edit it. And I have one colleague who really is good at deciphering what Roxanne meant to say. But yeah, it's hard. And I think, and that's another conversation too, is just like also friendships and, life partners and people who get us. And I don't think it's a surprise that I married a fellow person with dyslexia. We didn't know that we both had dyslexia at the time, or that we were going to give birth to somebody who then would have a more severe, dyslexia. We had no idea, but we got each other on some level. We were able to communicate, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think that's also quite difficult in parenting neurodiverse and gifted children, is just finding your tribe and finding peers and finding partners. And that's probably another whole podcast topic. But yeah, it's interesting because, and I play with that a little bit in the murder mystery too. I don't want to give too much away, but she has a love interest because he's gifted, but he's very linear in the way he thinks. And she doesn't understand quite yet. She'll figure it out in book 2, that they just have very different, processes and the ways that they're, and that can be very complementary or not.
And it depends on the subject, because that's my husband and I'm very linear and he's very, you knew what I meant. I was like, but that doesn't work for me. Like I might have known what you meant, but I still need to hear it right.
Exactly. I want to make sure I'm filling in, or that's good, because some of us who don't do that will fill in the spaces for ourselves. And that can be very dangerous too, especially if you have a writerly mind. All sorts of stuff can come up, like raccoons in the trash, like, and then you get in trouble with your teacher. But yeah, so I mean, there's a good side to that, and there's, it makes it difficult out in the real world sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
or even in your household.
Yeah, especially in your household or at work. I mean, I think you have to kind of, you have to, like, my trajectory as an anthropologist has been very different from my colleagues. And I've just gone with my strengths and my interests and kind of the ways and with what I feel is important to me as an advocate, and it looks very different in the final product, than other people. And sometimes that can be hard to justify, like, why wouldn't I want to write poetry instead of an academic article? And it's like, what? You can't do that. So you still get that even as an adult.
Mm-hmm. Well, Roxanne, I really appreciate all this.
Right.